I bought this super expensive unit and it's got a little dot in it. That's one thing people need to understand is I go back to my statement earlier. These are all like image intensification tubes are almost like grown, like you said, a living organism. There's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong in that process.
What is up, everybody? Jim to my right, Mr. Mike Griffin from Vortex Edge joining us today. We're basically talking about superpowers. A superpower. We're talking about the ability to see at night with night vision. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see a smattering of equipment on the table, all really cool stuff. In fact, I commented, Mike, I go, man, I don't have any cool stuff. So he gave me a laser over here. So I do have a laser, which sounds like lasers are kind of they go hand in hand with night vision, if you will. But, Mike.
This is the most expensive the table has ever been.
And I wouldn't say
like
it's
that should be something that gets tracked, like when we reach a new level.
Yeah. Like, what do you say while we're on the topic? Like, what do we got going on here? Like, what's the table cost? If a guy was like, I'll take the table.
I'd say like a new Ford Explorer.
Are you kidding me?
I don't know what a Ford Explorer goes for these days, but
Jim, thanks for putting it in terms of like a vehicle. You're like, oh, this is something.
A very nice used vehicle. Or I feel like used vehicles are super expensive these days.
True.
I mean, do you want a number? It's probably.
What's your number, Mike?
I'd easily say 40 grand.
Yeah, I was gonna estimate 40.
Wow,
yeah.
Unbelievable. It's not it's a lot of stuff, but it's not.
We've had more on this table.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I guess we'll get into cost. We'll do some what do they call that? Some foreshadowing when we talk about maybe cost a little bit down the road.
Right.
But Mike, night vision seems really cool.
Yeah.
You're into
basically a superpower.
Yeah. You know a lot about it. I feel like it's like you have worked with it professionally, but also like you have you're passionate about night vision.
Yeah. So I don't know really what the stimulus was other than being terrified of the dark. Not really. That's what I usually tell students is like, oh, you're all petrified of the dark. Well, at least we can be part of the same club. No, I just thought it was an amazing technology when the first piece that I ever bought was, I actually don't own anymore. I wish I had held on to it. It was one of those units that I bought it off eBay, but you could buy them at like Walmart or Cabela's back in the early 2000s. And it was a little handheld unit. You could probably get one in like a subdued color. I think mine was like bright yellow because it was focused at hunters, right? So you didn't want to like drop it and then it's dark and you can't find your little handheld night vision device, your key to being able to look around at night. And I remember I opened it up, pulled it out of the box, and it was terrible. Like it barely like did anything. And I was so disappointed, and I immediately boxed it back up and sold it on eBay, and I set my eyes on like, I'm going to buy a real piece of night vision. So I started doing all the research, and back in like 2005-ish, that was tough. Like there wasn't a lot of information out there. The internet was still relatively young, and a lot of it was from like forums. And so I started cruising forums and eBay, etc., and found out there was a lot of stolen stuff on eBay. And so I was like, well, I don't want to buy like, stolen military equipment.
Was that like the good stuff though?
So it was like the only stuff that was really available was seemingly that. And then I found on ARFCOM there was like this whole series of posts about like, yeah, that's a stolen piece of equipment, that's not, this is, etc. And I just found one of the guys that was real active in that, and I messaged him. I was like, hey man, can you tell me everything that I need to know about purchasing? And that led to me purchasing this PVS-14 right here, which has since been upgraded a little bit. The housing's been swapped out, but that was my first introduction to night vision because I just thought it was an amazing capability, and there was a lot of mystique about because very, very few people had access to it, right? It just wasn't like the market is today, where we see people constantly come through classes, and then I go and take classes with other instructors, and the social media presence of night vision is massive on the commercial side, and obviously there's the professional user side. Part of the drive for me, I ended up working as a security contractor, and I wanted to know how to use this stuff better going into that, and it worked out. Like, I would say on my first team in particular, like, I probably had the greatest level of knowledge about night vision, which kind of set me up for success with training some other guys. But it was just an awesome capability, and now to me it's something I'm into, and I'm like, I love seeing the new stuff, I love seeing the new capabilities, the refinements, and it's fun to play with, right? Yeah. Like, go out, and I tell people all the time, like, I try to do as much stuff under night vision as possible. I'll go play with the dog under night vision. So,
if you're watching on YouTube, you can probably see like a very like genuine smile on Mike's face, like as he like even just says the word night vision. And I think
it's true.
What you touched on a little bit is probably what we're going to spend some time on today. We're going to talk about a lot of things with night vision, but like distilling down, like, what to look for in night vision and the terminology. Because in talking with both you guys before the podcast, like, it's just kind of this nebulous, weird thing to navigate a little bit.
It's definitely, like Mike said, it's more popular than it was once, and I think people do have access to more information, but still, we're not at the level of where night vision equipment is like an AR-15, I think you don't have to look for 5 seconds to find information enough to build your own AR and to build it any way you want it and swap things out and figure out how to make it just right, and customize and things like that. Night vision still, I don't know if that probably is partly because of how costly it is. Because, it's more popular, but still you're just not going to have as many people being able to purchase it due to cost limitations. Hopefully that changes eventually in the future. But I mean, there's different housings. There's the tubes themselves. They're almost like, I swear, they're like living organisms with their own individual personalities, because you can't there's no mil spec necessarily. I suppose, the military has a specification, but there's not like, even when you look at, this is aviation grade and this is, some other grade that's accepted by the Department of Defense or something like that. Even each one within that is going to potentially look different. They might have different little blends or something. It's funny.
There's a lot of little variables that make up the contract standard. So there would be like a minimum threshold standard, and then but a lot of stuff can be different from night vision device to night vision device, even though it meets that standard. So like in a bit, or now, whenever, we can talk about what I call the birth certificate or the data sheet for a tube. There's a lot of different stuff broken down on there of like, there's a minimum standard for it to fall under this category of tube. But then there's a lot of variation meeting that standard for a handful of variables. And it is almost like a living, I like to think of it, it's like something that is grown in a lab, because it kind of is, right? Like, a tremendous amount of effort goes into it. And if you look at the history of the industry, there's been periods of time where industry has had a really hard time producing high quality tubes at scale. And so, without getting too deep in the weeds, if you look at the current manufacturers that are in the U.S. That make night vision, it hasn't been like a pain-free path to developing the stuff that we have and being able to produce, large volumes of tubes. I will say, I feel like right now we're kind of in the good days of, like, there's lots of really good tubes coming out. The military is getting, all that they want, and there's plenty available for the commercial market. There's been times where, like, we absolutely didn't get amazing tubes. And then there's been other times where the lead times have been crazy long. So think 6, 9, 12 months to get a really high quality tube. And now I feel like I could go to a number of retailers online, add to cart, and it would be here fairly quick.
Yeah. We gotta address some terminologies, I feel like, before we get into the birth certificate that you have over there and the spec sheets and things like that, because you've already mentioned the word tube a couple times, which some people would look at like what I'm holding here, if you're watching on YouTube, which is, what people would call traditionally a set of dual tube night vision or a binocular style night vision. This would be mounted on a helmet and flipped down in front of your face over both of your eyes. But like what I'm actually physically holding, this is the housing. Right, yep. And then inside of it is the actual tubes themselves. So, like, what terminology is important for somebody who's newer to night vision to be aware of, just so that they can navigate when they're talking?
Yeah. So, just kind of the anatomy of the device. So the exterior portion that you just mentioned, the housing, kind of holds all the guts to the device together. With that, so the part that looks out at the world is the objective lens, just like kind of any optic system. So the objective lens, I think it looks at the objects that I want to check out, and then I have the main body of the housing. Inside of that housing is an image intensification tube. So it takes an image in, it intensifies that image so that it's more visible by basically converting photons, the light particles, I guess, or light signal, over to electrons, and then those electrons are intensified through the image intensification tube. And then they're presented onto a phosphor screen, and then you look at them through the ocular side. So I've got an objective, which can be focused through this ring right here, and then I've got an ocular, which can also be focused. This one has a ring. PVS 31s have snap-on adjustments for focusing the ocular side of things, and then I have like the battery compartment and some of the controls, on and off button. This one has an illuminator, which is, think a flashlight in the infrared spectrum. This one also has auto gain, or not auto gain, adjustable gain. So I can adjust, kind of think of it like a dimmer. So I can like turn the image down, the amount of intensification down, or I can crank it way up.
And are you doing that based on ambient light then?
Yeah, so there's two different options. You can have manual or auto. Auto, it'll vary kind of on its own based on what the ambient light is. And there's a kind of a window of adjustment in there. Manual, I used to not care about manual gain. I was just like, oh yeah, I have the choice, I'll take it. And I find that I use it more and more. And I have, so the PVS 31s have manual gain. And yeah, if I'm in an environment where there's a reasonable amount of ambient light that like my adapted eyes can see with, then I'll turn the gain down so that I have less bright of an image through the tubes or through the night vision device, and I can pick up some stuff in my periphery. The other time that I use it is kind of administratively when zeroing, so that I can, if you think about like when we zero red dots, we'll take the intensity of the dot down as low as we can to where we can see a nice crisp clean dot for accuracy, where I'm purely trying to get as accurate information as I can for zeroing. I'll do that. I'll adjust my gain down, or I'll adjust ambient lighting if I can, so that I have a nice clear laser on target, so that I get as clean a crisp group as I possibly can from a clean crisp visual image downrange.
Now, one of the interesting things about the housings and night vision in general, something that I didn't realize at first is, I look at, so you have a PVS 14. There's all these different PVS and various different names, and we have what are these DTNVGs or DTNVSs or something like that. They all have different names for these housings. But in a lot of instances, like with these DTNVSs and the PVS 14, the tube inside of them is really the expensive part.
Yep.
And that can be swapped. You can keep the same housing maybe for some time as long as you don't break it, and you can potentially swap tubes. You can upgrade tubes over time. provided that it's the type that fits within these, right?
Yeah, so you can go either direction, right? So like this was a PVS 14. It had an old legacy housing with a not so great battery compartment. And I can't remember if it broke or if I just opted to replace it before it broke, because they're very common for breaking, old bayonet style. And so I sent it off and had all the lenses and the tube pulled out and put into a better housing, an updated housing that uses a screw-on cap that's more reliable, less likely to become damaged. Or if I really wanted to, I'm not a huge fan of this, but it is an option. Like I could have taken that tube and plugged it into a binocular set of night vision, not that housing, but like the DTMVS's, and paired it with another tube that's very similar in performance, so that now I would have dual tube. Mm-hmm. Similarly, the other option is like maybe the tubes that are in that DTMVS are awesome, performing tubes, and a new housing comes out that does something different that I want, or I want it to be, have some sort of other characteristics than what the DTMVS has. I could pull those tubes and ideally the lenses out and plug them into that new housing, and either hang on to the old housing or sell it off. There's a number of different specs of think tube size, so external dimensions that allow you to change them over from housing to housing. That's one of the really cool things, kind of like the AR-15 market, is that the components have gotten to where they're popular enough that aftermarket brands are producing them. So whereas you think like, hey, this PVS 31 came out of the factory assembled and complete. The company that made the image intensification tube put all of that stuff together, the lenses, the housing, etc. All of it was designed to work together, and it came out a factory sealed device. This, the PVS 14 and the DTMVS, those a set of probably a batch of image intensification tubes came to a dealer that is also an assembler, and then they bought lenses from a manufacturer, and they bought a housing from a manufacturer, and they assembled them all together, and they sold you that product with their warranty and support and that sort of thing. And so this is a pretty cool housing. And the nice thing is that if something happens to this housing, you can go and buy that one piece, or you can buy a complete housing for fairly affordable. I will say some factory assembled units, that is a much more involved process. They're not really, the thought or goal in designing them was less of hey, let me take a bunch of different parts from different manufacturers and piece them together into a very functional unit. So if this PVS 31 were to break, there's very limited resources for me to have that repaired compared to this. Or this guy is like the ultimate when it comes
PVS
to
14.
Yeah, the PVS 14. I mean, you can go to eBay and purchase pieces and parts, or you can go to a handful of online retailers and purchase pieces and parts. And if you have the know-how, you can repair your own piece of night vision, or you can send it off to somebody that has a little side gig of repairing night vision, and it's fairly easy to get repaired. As you kind of step up in complexity, that gets a bit more difficult, with factory assembled units probably being the most difficult. They have, proprietary parts that are not accessible on the market, except through, authorized dealers or repair centers, et cetera. And so it becomes more difficult. It's also more difficult if something new came out. I don't know, what you would want out of the next, newest housing. Maybe some fusion, adding thermal to this built into the housing. Like I could pull these tubes out or send them to a shop and be like, hey, pull those tubes out and put it into that, fusion housing that puts thermal with them, and I haven't really lost anything, right? Like I have a little bit of loss of expense in the housing, but I might be able to recoup that by selling it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Okay.
How readily accessible are the tubes then?
So,
Or I mean, like from like a
dealer,
or from an access standpoint of like, yeah, I'm going to pull the tube out.
So if you think about like, you basically have this assembly. If I take off some of these rings right here, I can pull the tube out, right? So like if you see, they're fairly low profile, but like I can disassemble. Whereas if you look over at like the PVS 31, every little hole that has a screw has sealant on it. And so like that unit is pretty well sealed up and doesn't want you to get into it. I would say, with a fairly simple toolkit and knowledge about how to do it, you could pull these things apart. I will say I know a handful of people that don't have any background in night vision. Like they never worked for a night vision manufacturer. They never worked for an assembly house dealer. And they have built their own units by purchasing pieces and parts off the internet. That's a bit much for me. Like I'm not going to do that. But it's possible. Like there's lots and lots of content out in the world, instructional content on like how to assemble those things. It's not like it's too big of a price point for me to tinker around with that. Most of the guys that I know that have done it have bought very, very inexpensive like BLEM tubes off of forums and such, and then they've bought housings. Generally, I think one dude did a dual tube set with like an old, maybe a PVS 15, which is binocular, but the other guy did a PVS 14. So it's pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. And then the biggest thing is like, do you care about it being nitrogen purged? To prevent all the atmospheric concerns.
Yeah.
But that's a very like down the rabbit hole. Like that's even
there's a lot of that in night vision.
Yeah,
there's a lot of potential rabbit holes.
Yeah.
I feel like we got to get into the tube stuff itself because that's where I feel like a significant amount of confusion and also just like you're a little bit awestruck immediately when you start looking into this. But since we're talking about housings, Mike, I am curious if you can give the quick pros and cons of what we have over here with the PVS 14, which is a monocular style.
Yep.
I know that you can also, and you can get into this too, but there's mounts where you can run two PVS 14s next to one another on a helmet setup. That's also what we're referring to here most of the time, I should point out. We're talking about like the helmet setup because there are weapons mounted night vision things. You can use a PVS 14 with a different mount on top of a firearm, etc. But we're talking helmet mounted here. So there's the monocular style, there is the dual tube or binocular style, and even within that, of course, like we've pointed out already, like we have this set of DTMVSs here, these are unique from, what are those RNVGs that I got?
Yeah,
RNVG. These can articulate differently, and the RNVG can, it doesn't have as many features as this maybe. So what all is going on here? How does one choose what housing they even want to be interacting with?
Yeah, so if you think we've got the PVS 14, which is kind of the oldest or most legacy unit that's on the table here. Prior to that was the PVS 7 unit, and that had one objective lens, and then it would go into the image intensification tube, and it would provide an image to both eyes.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. They look really funny because it's like two eyes that then go into one.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And so that's different from binocular night vision where you have one image intensification tube and set of lenses per eye. So monocular, obviously cheaper, or should be obvious because you have half as much stuff. So you have one set of lenses and one image intensification tube. The benefits are that it's less expensive, historically it's been lower weight, although some binocular night vision setups are getting close in weight. And weight is important because you got this thing hanging out in front of your face, and a lot of people don't think about weight until it's on their head, and they're like, oh man, my neck hurts, especially after you wear it for hours and hours. The potential benefit is that with the 14, you have one eye that is unaided and can be picking up information out in the world, not looking through a night vision device. So in intermediate levels of light, not really, really dark, that you're able to like pick up information. I think that's an argument, like it's an okay argument. If you have your dual tubes or binocular night vision set up well, you have a lot of peripheral that you can pick up, and so some of it has to do with acclimation to the dark of that unaided eye, and then you get into binocular night vision. So the DTMVSs, PVS-31s, RMVGs, and there's a whole bunch of other options out there. The RMVGs are actually a really cool setup. They're super, super durable. They have a fixed bridge, so
they can't do this.
So it doesn't have articulating pods, and articulating pods are cool because I can wear them on my helmet, flipped up like this, like a hat brim. For one, I think sometimes it's just a bit of a flex. Like, hey, I have premium NODS that the pods articulate up.
If you're like a vehicle, though, you're not like with the NODS on your head.
I will absolutely say, like, getting in and out of vehicles, particularly the smaller the vehicle, but even like getting in and out of a Bearcat, like armored vehicle, like having the ability to flip your NODS up in those articulating pods with the optics still looking forward is lower profile and easier to get in and out of stuff, because you can kind of have a reference point of like where the edge of your night vision is when you're going through doorways. When you flip them up like deer antlers, it's like, hey, I can't see where this device is over my head, and so the tendency is to like smash them into stuff. And eventually you get kind of accustomed to like, hey, this thing's sitting 6 inches off of my head, and you duck down. But think about trying to like get out of a small vehicle, and you got to dip your head down to get out, and it's like, oh, maybe I have a bunch of kit on, and it's already hard to get in and out of vehicles. It's a little bit easier if they're pointed forward. The other thing that I like about articulating pods is I can flip them up like this, and they're still like, they're looking at the same thing I'm looking at. They're not flipped up and like looking at lights that are overhead. So if you inadvertently leave your night vision on, and you flip them up, then they're not staring at like overhead lights. They're looking at the thing that you're looking at, and you can be like, oh man, that's really bright, and maybe check and make sure like, hey, my night vision isn't staring at a bright light source when I think it's turned off. Kind of a not huge deal. If you just remember to turn them off every time, it's not a big deal. But having burned a set of tubes before, doing that, it's a consideration for me.
Were those tubes the ones like these DTMVSs that have auto off?
So that set did not.
Yeah. These ones do, but it's still, I always am kind of like...
It's not perfect. Yeah. Sometimes it turns off when you don't want it to, and sometimes it doesn't turn off. But, so that's the biggest, like selling point for the articulating pods. Personally, I like the interpupillary adjustment, or the getting the tube to be lined up with your eye of fixed bridge night vision. Like, I feel like I can get a better position in front of my eye because it's moving on a flat plane instead of on a curve.
Yeah.
I obviously I have articulating, like these are my PVS-31s, and those are articulating pods. The biggest concerns for me are durability. Like that fixed bridge, generally it's going to fail at the bridge, and it's not terribly expensive to repair. Articulating pods, it just depends on which one it is. Like, is it going to fail at this little arm right here, or is it going to fail at the housing? if it were to become damaged.
It is nice when you have that fixed bridge, because when you do flip them down, they're in the same spot every time. But with this thing, it's on you to, if you do that whole thing and you articulate them out, it's on you to actually get them back to the right interpupillary distance every time. You can get those little stopper dues.
An add-on that has stops.
That's what they call them.
Stopper dues.
Stopper dues.
Or the 31s have those stops built in. And so you just push them down until it comes to a stop. And as long as you had adjusted them correctly, they should be pretty close, lined up in front of your eye.
Yeah.
But the fixed bridge is really nice. So like Anvis goggles, Aviation goggles, I believe it's the PVS 23s have that, and then the RMVGs, the Sentinels, they all work off of that fixed bridge system.
Right. When using a monocular style, do you close an eye when you want to actually like look through the night vision?
I generally don't.
You don't? Okay.
No, because you just kind of leave it up to your brain to figure it out.
Okay.
So like I will wear a PVS 14 over my dominant eye. And that's another question that comes up a bunch is people back in the day were like, nah, you need to put it over your non-dominant eye so that if you need to shoot, then you present your gun in front of your dominant eye. And it's like, okay. Because I think the thought was you're going to go white light to shoot. I never really liked that because they were shooting through like red dot optics, right, or daytime optics. I found that like I had a more difficult time interacting with my environment by having the monocular over my non-dominant eye. So I would put it over my dominant eye, and now it's like, hey, my good eye can see better than my not so good eye, and I'm able to interact with my environment better. And then I set my gun up so that if I was shooting a daytime optic, I could shoot it through night vision, or I have a laser on it and I am looking through the night vision and the laser's just presented on target and you shoot. So
makes sense. Should we discuss tubes now?
Yes.
I feel like we hit housings pretty good. Of course, if there's more things that you'd like us to get into, this doesn't have to be a one and done type deal on this podcast. We can get into more in future episodes. But I do feel like those tubes and all the specs and all this stuff that you have to consider, because that's really like the part that you don't want to mess up. I'll give that in air quotes. You don't want to make a wrong choice and spend all that money on the tube and then be I'm sure you could probably sell it or something like that, but you do feel like when you're spending all that money, you want to get it right the first time and have something that's going to last you for a while. Maybe you can stick it in other housings. But Mike, what are you suggesting for somebody who's newer to NODS? What specs should they be aware of? What should they even start looking at? When they start seeing people point out things like blems or things like that, like, is that a big red flag or is that normal?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is try to budget, and save up and buy something that is a good quality unit kind of from the outset. Generally speaking, you kind of go back to my experience is like I tried to save money and I bought like this. First, I didn't do any research, and I bought this thing that I was like, oh, it's night vision. Like it's, it's like, oh, it's 9mm ammo. I'm sure it's fine. And it's like, not so much. So, do your research. Hopefully some of the things we cover will give you some points to jump off from when it comes to research, and then try to, save up and think about like this is an investment that I want it to have some longevity instead of just like, I want something right now, and I bought something I'm not super happy with it.
It's still probably going to be expensive.
It's still going to be expensive. So like maybe if you save, another $500 or $1,000, you'll get something that you're super happy with versus something that you're not so happy with. So with that, just a quick discussion about dealers. So we talked about, factory sealed units like the PVS 31. You can buy factory sealed units of the PVS 14 as well. But most of the time, you're going to find a dealer that has assembled that unit. Now, some dealers just buy. They're like, oh yeah, give me 3 PVS 14s made by XYZ company, and they didn't assemble it, and they just went to their distributor and purchased it, or however it got to them. And they're not really like a night vision dealer, so they maybe don't know to tell you like that the image intensification tube has a data sheet or any of the information on the data sheet. It's just like, yeah, it's a Gen 3 PVS 14. And it doesn't provide you any information about like, what the FOM, the figure of merit is, or kind of any of the nitty gritty details about how the tube performs, right? A good quality dealer will sell you units that they can break down all that detailed information. The best that I've seen, because I've had, I haven't bought, any night vision in the last year or two, but I have helped some of our students purchase night vision, and I don't I don't say, hey, you have to buy from this dealer because it's the people that I'm just like, hey, buy from whoever you feel comfortable with. This is where I've purchased from in the past. But some of the, sometimes there's red flags and things like that. One of the most recent purchases I helped with, a guy sent me a link and he was like, I'm looking between like these two different, items. I think there were like 2 series of tubes. One was unfilmed and one was thin filmed. So he sent me the product pages, and the dealer had broken it down like set number 1, and it had the serial number for the image intensification tube that was, left and right. It had a picture looking through each tube with the device on, looking at it like a plain background, and then it had all the specs broken down in a chart for unit number 1. And so you could literally add unit number 1 to the cart and purchase that one. Or there was like 6 or 8 other units, all with the same level of information. So you could pick out like, hey, I like that this one has a little bit, lower halo, which we'll talk about in a minute, or it had a little bit higher FOM, or this one had maybe like one little blim down in the, outer ring, and it, saved a couple pennies, on the cost. And that dealer went through a lot of effort to make sure that you were comfortable and knew what it was that you were getting, as opposed to think of another dealer that they just put up, here's, PVS 14. They don't tell you who made the image intensification tube. They just say U.S. made. Okay. Well, that doesn't tell me a whole lot.
Tells me everything I need to know.
Right? Maybe they don't even say U.S. made. They just say Gen 3 PVS 14, and it's made by XYZ company, and you don't really know what you're getting other than a Gen 3. Like, that's a huge spectrum when you look at Generation 3. Like, that technology is like documented all the way into like the late 70s, early 80s to today, so that's what, a little over 40 years of spectrum of something that falls into Gen 3. So if you don't give us those specifications, it's really hard to feel like you got a great deal out of your purchase.
Right.
Whereas that other company went through and it's like, okay, here is a set of tubes made by L3. They're 2600 FOM on one tube and 2630 on another tube, and like here's a picture through it, and here's the data sheet of all the breakdown, halo, EBI, etc.
Yeah.
When you brought up like that spectrum of time, I just pictured an ad like computer for sale.
Yeah, computer for sale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Made in America.
Has Minesweeper. But when you were mentioning, I've seen sometimes where you'll see those websites that are just selling like, here's a PVS 14, like buy it or not. And, their price will be really cheap for example. And so you're starting to do the calculations in your head, like if these people are even going to make any money, okay, I'm guessing I'm dealing with some of the lower end stuff. You can maybe make some inferences there. But I've seen on some of those websites that do give you all the information, sometimes you will see a PVS 14, for example, that's being sold at a nice discount price. But then when you look into it, you're like, okay, let me look at these units that are available. And you're like, okay, now I see why it's discounted, because this one's got blems all over the place, and they're being really upfront about it. You can still buy it and still use it, but, I mean, just know. And so I think a lot of people, when they get a brand new product, they always expect it to be perfect. And with night vision, that's not necessarily the case, which is always really weird, because you're like, well, wait a minute. I'm buying this brand new. It's not even labeled. Like if I get a blem lower from Palmetto, I know it might have a nick in it somewhere, like inside the mag well or whatever. They're usually really good about that. But, if I buy a brand new set of night vision, it's not even labeled as a blem, and there's a dot in the bottom corner, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What happened?
So like PVS 31s, super nice unit. Even like when I first turned them on, I was coming from, like, this was the previous unit that I had personally owned. I had used a couple of binocular sets in between there. And when I turned it on, I was like, this is amazing. Like, they look awesome. After I've used them over time, I'm like, oh, there's a little blem there in the corner. And if I had not kind of been so blown away by how much better that was over this, and I just picked it up and I was, not sort of like wowed by how great the image was, I probably would have noticed that little blem and been like, oh, this is crap. Like I bought this super expensive unit and it's got a little dot in it. But I think that's one thing people need to understand is, I go back to my statement earlier. These are all like image intensification tubes are almost like grown, like you said, a living organism. There's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong in that process and they not be 100% perfect. And I say wrong, there's an opportunity for little flaws here and there, like little, hey, the SNR, the signal to noise ratio isn't exactly the same in every one of these, image intensification tubes we built in this batch. The one might have a blem and another one doesn't, or whatever. Like there's all these opportunities for little variables to be tweaked. Because it's such an involved process to build these things. But I would rather know going into the purchase than like, hey, I just spent, we'll just say $3,500 on a PVS 14. I didn't have any of that information up front. I take it out and it's got a big, black spot in like zone 2. Like that would suck. Yeah. I would be upset.
Yeah. Before we get into all the alphabet soup, because that's, I feel like, the most in the weeds you can get on this stuff. Like, let's go slightly less in. We're just dipping our toes in with stuff like, you've mentioned this term already once or twice, filmed versus unfilmed or thin filmed. Anyway. You got white phos and green phos. You've got, we can just say them. I mean, there's these different manufacturers you'll see where they'll appear to have the same thing on paper, but sometimes one is less expensive than the other, like L3 or Elbit, these different manufacturers. You'll see things like Aviation grade, and it's in all caps with a bunch of exclamation points. Like, what are some of these things, the like bigger items that you usually see in the description?
Thin filmed versus unfilmed. All of these rely on, just think of it as like protective coatings inside of the the image intensification tube that basically like protect it and give it the longevity, the lifespan that the tube has to function. So like most of these are 10,000. I don't remember what they were rated at when I purchased this unit, but like all the modern tubes are that are domestically made by the two big houses, L3 and Elbit, are 10,000 hour ratings. They'll probably last a lot longer than that. I always like to put the little asterisks next to that. Like people think like, oh my God, it has a finite life. It's not going to turn off at 10,000 hours. Also, I want you to think about like a 40-hour work week times 52 weeks is what, 2080, 2000. So you would have to be full time under night vision for 5 years for you to burn through that 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
So like, don't get upset about, like, I think people get upset about
Your life would be miserable if that's what you had.
Your neck would be sore.
It is interesting
You'd
though,
be
like
just ripped.
Yeah.
In the neck.
just within like how you guys are talking about the tubes like being like grown or an organism, and like now you're talking about them like it's like they have a half-life, like they're very
weird.
curious.
They are curious.
They are. It's almost like, how did we get this technology? Is it like alien technology and nobody wants to tell us? I mean, I'm just saying.
Maybe the next night vision podcast is a Joe Rogan one. But like in binoculars and rifle scopes and stuff, we always tout fully multi-coated lenses because that's a good thing for the anti-reflective nature of it. But in this, it seems like people prefer, for the quality of the image, unfilmed.
So if you think of the film as another layer of stuff between you and what it is you're trying to look at, and we're trying to like get as much light as possible, right? Then the fewer layers, then the more light can be transmitted through. That's how I like to think about it. Unfilmed is kind of a misnomer. There's still layers of film in there. It's just so thin that it's like unfilmed, versus thin filmed versus just filmed tubes. And so if you look at like the generations of night vision, Gen 3 has one of the characteristics is that it has these layers of film to help give the night vision tube more longevity. The thinner we can make the film, the more light sort of gain we can have. The other thing is we generally see much cleaner, crisper images because there's less distortion. So like unfilmed tubes are crisp, very, very crisp.
Crispy.
Yeah. Now, some people will say that like thin film tubes are more durable. They're both 10,000 hour tubes. Like, how much durability do you need? And do you prefer a better image? I will say that like subjectively, I find that sometimes I'll see a bit more like memory in unfilmed tubes. And what I mean by that is like I'll look at a light image and it'll stay
like back when you used to have a plasma screen TV and you didn't pause on a movie too long.
Yeah. That you'll get a little bit more than that, but that's subjective, and there's so many variables within night vision tubes that I feel like it could also be attributed to something else. But to me, like, if you were to buy the best of the best right now, I would look for a really high FOM figure of merit tube that is unfilmed, white phos versus green phos. So your eye can see the most shades of green. I think I said that correctly. I generally say like it can see green really well. And so when we when designers of night vision back in the day settled on like, hey, what color do we want to make the screen? Well, let's make it green because you can see a lot of different shades and we're trying to pick up contrast, right? And so they made them in green phos, and you can get different shades of green. So I have an old night vision or image tube textbook from years and years ago, and it has a big chart that lists out like all the different colors that you can have. But green was the prevalent one for a very long time, and white phos had been played with. I don't remember the first time. I'd say the first time I had a chance to look through white phos image tubes was probably 7 years ago. And there's still like debates, like people that grew up professionally using green. Some of them are like, oh, I would rather have green. They just feel more comfortable. They feel like they can see better in them. Generally speaking, I find that people get subjectively less eye strain with white. And so if you're spending 8-10 hours under night vision at a time, like eye strain is a big deal. So I generally say, like, if you have two really, really high performing tubes, I would rather have white than green. But if I have like one really, really high performing green and a mediocre tube in white, like I'll take the green. Like the color of the tube is less important to me than all the other like stuff,
the quality and stuff.
Then like, hey, what is the SNR? What's the halo? What's the EBI? Like, what are those other characteristics than what color the screen is that presents the image to me?
Yeah.
Are the things that you just mentioned, all those acronyms or whatever, are those factors that go into the FOM? Like, are those what make up the FOM?
Yeah, we're probably about there now to start getting into all those.
Real good question. So, figure of merit has to do with basically the resolution of the tube. So think of like a good kind of comparison is like how many pixels are in your TV screen, right? So what is the resolution of the tube? And it goes in. So if you look at this data sheet, so I'll hold it up. This is for one of the units that we have here at work. There's two because it's binocular device. So there's thresholds and then there's actual. And what I mean by that is like they'll say, hey, the minimum for this unit is 64, and that's the center resolution. It's measured in line pairs per millimeter. That's the minimum for this tube to be deliverable under the classification that it is. But it might be like 67 is the actual. This one is 72, which is actually right at the next threshold. So the standard thresholds are 57, 64, 72, and 81. There might be one higher than that. I've never seen a set of tubes that had resolution higher than 81. And so you'll see like there's a column where it says like min, and then actual, and there's also a column for max because there's some stuff that you want it to be a ceiling of like, if it's above this, it's not deliverable, or it's just like, hey, these are the maximum window that we're willing to deliver to you guys. So it's the resolution multiplied by the large number of the signal to noise ratio. So if you think that ratio is always going to be against a 1, so like how many parts signal to noise, and the I guess constant there would be 1. So let's look at this one. So the min is 24.1. That's the minimum that this tube could ship under.
The minimum what?
The SNR, signal to noise, 24.1 to 1. And then the actual is 33.7. So if you do 33.7 times 72, and we also got to do this for people's sake too, because this gets confusing as well. You got to tell us when higher is better and when lower is better. In this case, signal to noise not good, signal good. So the higher the signal to noise ratio is, the better. And then the higher the FOM, being, in essence this resolution number, the higher that number, the better. So these are things you want to just basically max if you can. The FOM figure of merit is kind of like it's a made-up thing in the sense that kind of the background to it is the government needed a value to assess night vision for a couple of reasons. One was for export. So like Gen 3 night vision is not supposed to be taken outside of the country, and technically speaking, like non-U.S. citizens aren't supposed to look through it because they can assess that capability.
That's why we can't even show you a video through it for this.
Yeah. So FOM was an easy metric that they felt like represented the capability well. But it's not the only thing, right? Like there's other factors in here. So you could have like a really high FOM unit, but it has a bunch of blims in it. And it's like, okay, cool. Around all these nasty, marks in my tube, I can see really well.
Yeah.
But so it was like you'll find figures of merit in lots of different, industries. And it's just like, hey, we have a couple of variables. We, put them into a math equation and it spits out a number, and we assess, like, hey, this is this has a lot of merit or it doesn't have a lot of merit. And so FOM is like a, kind of buzzword. So it's that SNR, times the resolution, center resolution. Higher is better. So like back in the day, I think PVS 14s, when they were deliverable to the Army, 1600 sticks out in my head. And now we have like, this is a 24 and change tube on this data sheet. So, pretty substantial difference. And there's other components that go in there, but like that's the kind of big buzzword for these. So you want to have as high of a FOM as you can get.
Okay.
I have seen tubes that have 3,000 plus FOM, so like the numbers get up there. And then the important ones after that, photocathode sensitivity, how well the photocathode converts lumens into electrons, light into electrons, because we talk about like we're taking light in, converting it into electrons, and then as those electrons bounce through the microchannel plate, they're amplified. They're like more electrons are being produced, and then they're converted back into photons on the phosphor screen, like they're transmitted out into a viewable image. And so like more sensitive photocathode, better. EBI, equivalent background input, or illumination, depending on if you're talking about image intensification tubes or just generic tubes. Amount of light seen when unit is on, but no light is on the photocathode. So think about like almost like noise. So like if I were to like cover up that tube and I can still see information coming in, like I'm seeing little bits of light produced by the tube, that takes away from my information gathering ability, right? Like I'm seeing stuff that's not representative of the environment that I'm looking at.
It's usually kind of like fuzzy and right.
So I want that to be as low as possible, so I'm not getting this like incorrect information projected into my eye.
So
right?
the EBI number you want to be low?
I want it to be low. So generally speaking, like I want everything to be high except for EBI and halo. And if you think of halo as light or a halo around light sources, like I want to look at something and being able to see an image that's clean and crisp and clear versus seeing like this halo around it. So like some people, that maybe have eye issues, or as they get older, they talk about like, I can't drive at night anymore because I have like this distracting image around bright lights.
Yeah.
That's a very similar effect that we see with halo, and that's a measurable thing. Some image tubes will have more halo than others, and so if I can pick a tube that has less halo, I'm going to have a cleaner, crisper image when I'm presented with like bright light sources.
Is that part of what goes into when you see these aviation grade tubes? Because they have lights everywhere in their cockpit. They can't just see like a giant. They can't just be sitting in a halo.
Yeah,
that was Mike. What makes an aviation grade tube?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, is to say an aviation. So there's aviation grade, and then there's certified. So like there's tubes that are certified for aviation, or units that are certified for aviation, and then there's aviation grade. So like aviation grade meets the standards of like halo. That's the biggest one, is that they have a much lower halo standard, so that you're seeing a nice, clean, crisp image without any of that distortion. Versus like, hey, this is going to be used on a helicopter and it needs to be certified to do that. So those are two different things, and that certification is an ongoing process versus like, hey, we have this thing that came out of the factory and it has low halo and maybe a couple of other factors. So in the past, I want to say some green tubes were produced in a slightly different shade of green for aviation stuff. And so there's a couple of other factors, but the big one is some of the clarity stuff and the halo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of, going back to the EBI thing that you brought up is kind of interesting, I think, for people to learn. I guess, like in that, you talk about what the tube looks like when you're in complete darkness, you know. And it's funny to think when you talk about night vision, a lot of people think it is full-on magic. It's like mostly magic, but not full-on magic, you know. And you think that you can just have it be pitch black, like Silence of the Lambs basement pitch black, and have everything work perfect. But it does need some ambient light.
It does.
And in fact, some ambient light helps it work better and make things look more clear.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of interesting. I remember because we have our shoot house down at the range, and you can make it completely pitch black in there. I mean, just total darkness. And I got 2 different night vision devices, and Mike, you might remember this because I balled out on one because I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get the nicest thing I can get, and then I'll have it for a long time. And I got the L3 white phos unfilmed, aviation whatever it was,
all the stuff,
all this stuff, yeah. And I went back into the darkest of the dark rooms in the back when it was pitch black, and it definitely wasn't as fuzzy looking as it was when I had the not as many buzz terms Elbit tubes in the other
which
device.
are thin filmed.
Yeah, thin filmed. And then I went back there and I could see, whoa, yeah, there's like a little more. It looks like there's little gnats flying all around me or something.
Yeah, scintillation or that kind of background noise.
Yeah.
And so that's the big. If you were to like look at a piece of night vision that doesn't have a bunch of blims on it. And if I wanted to like sell you a piece of night vision and maybe not be the most like upstanding, sales guy, I would show you 2 pieces of night vision, like one really amazing piece of night vision from my competitor, and then a piece that's maybe not as high performing, doesn't have a bunch of blimps in it, in an intermediate level of light, because they're probably both going to work awesome, right? Like a little bit of light and they have all the photons to work with. It's when you get into those really dark levels that your higher performing tube is just going to work better. Like the RMVG set that you got with the thin filmed, like those look really nice, clean and crisp, but as you get darker and darker and darker, it's not going to work quite as well.
It was funny because there were aspects of it that I even almost liked more when we were looking at an intermediate light.
Yeah.
I was like, come on, man.
Yeah.
And then you're
like,
no.
why did I spend all this money?
You're like, go in the shoot
it's
house.
Super crispy.
Go in the shoot house, go in that back room, I'll turn the lights off. And then it was like, I got it now. It makes sense. But so
those are great tubes. Like, I don't want anybody to have a takeaway of like, oh, those are really, really good quality tubes.
They're fantastic. I was comparing, a Razor Gen 2 1:6 to a PST Gen 2 1. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like in some ways, or maybe that's not even the perfect explanation. But I'm comparing 2 great pieces. It's just that finally I could see the difference.
Yeah,
and
it's that very narrow spectrum of use where you can see that difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's kind of the case. There are similar aspects to this when you compare to traditional daytime optics. It's the same thing with rifle scopes and binoculars. You can make a cheaper set look really good when the lighting is perfect. And that's when most people, funny enough, when most people are looking in the stores, it's, they're on their lunch break and it's noon on a bluebird day and they're going to look out across the parking lot and not understand why they might spend double on that set of binos or something. Mm-hmm. But it's when things really get slim on light that the best optics sort of come to light.
Yeah.
I didn't want to use that term, but I had to.
Well, you did. You can't take it back now.
This is the radio. We can't have silence.
No.
Lose listeners that way.
Question.
Yeah.
Might not be the brightest question, Jim.
Let's keep them rolling.
But, when do you switch to night vision? You know what I mean? Like, when are you like, yep, I'm going to look through my NODS now?
And so every time you do it, do you have to say switching to NODS?
I think so.
Going dark.
Yeah.
So it depends. So there's the lighting environment that you're in, and then there's maybe the lighting environment that you're trying to look into, right? So like there are times, think like, okay, it's starting to get dark. Sometimes I'll just flip my NODS down and see if it gives me any benefit or not, and I'll adjust my gain and take a look, that way. So I will say, like, it doesn't have to be completely pitch black, but the darker it is, generally the more advantage you have over somebody who has unaided vision, right?
So the answer is whenever you feel it helps.
Whenever you feel like it helps, yeah.
Okay.
And then we talk about, like, well, what is your application? Like, are you, playing with the dog or taking the trash out? Are you like a professional user that's defending a community or a country, or are you hunting?
I can say this: I've never been in a situation where I'm playing with the dog, taking the trash out, being like,
man, I just
if only I had.
That's
well,
because,
so at that
because
point,
you haven't experienced it yet.
Yeah.
Once you experience playing with the dog at night with NODS on, you'll never
go back.
You'll never go
Okay.
back.
Okay.
So that's the thing is, like, at
You're
that
out
point,
there in
it's
your
like,
pump
just,
helmet.
as soon as it's dark enough, as soon as the sun dips down, and it's dark-ish, like, you can throw them on. Now, it's enhancing the image that you can see, and you don't have any risk posed to your night vision, right?
Okay.
So that's the thing. Is, like, I generally don't want to turn my night vision on during, like, full daylight, and just run around with it. For one, the limitations are worse than any benefit that it offers me, because this has a 40-degree field of view versus, like, my organic vision, roughly 180 to 190 degrees field of view. So putting this on offers me nothing, right? Like, but if it's starting to get dark and there's a bunch of, like, shading in areas and things like that, and I want to be able to, like, look into an area that has, shadowing, that sort of thing, the sun is down, but there's still some ambient light, then that benefit is going to allow me to look into areas. Now, there may be times where, like, hey, it's less beneficial than just looking with my adapted, naked eye. So I'll flip my NODS up and not use night vision. But it's a nice tool to have, because I think when you, like, flip it down, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize all the stuff that I didn't see, because it's dark. Yeah.
I mean, I find that with regular optics or just binoculars. It'd be like, it's getting pretty dark, like, then you throw your binoculars up, you're like, I can still see pretty damn good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's true. Boy, we brought the guns and stuff. I don't know if we're actually going to get to lasers in time. That may be another podcast, which I'm sure people would be interested in. The other tools used with night vision. I don't know. What do you think, Mark? The other one I was going to ask, just that's still related to what we've talked about without leaving too much on the table, is night vision versus thermal. What do you think?
We can do that, and I've just, like, written down some random notes that I just have questions on, a couple terminology things.
Oh yeah, do that.
Should
do
I
that first.
Okay. Muzzle flash.
Yeah, it's light. So if you think of, generally speaking, image intensification tubes will intensify any light. So there's some caveats to that of, like, certain shades that some tubes versus other tubes don't intensify well. But muzzle flash is light, so it's gonna intensify it.
Is it going to be like...
Sometimes that can be a big deal. Sometimes that can be not a big deal. So if you have a good muzzle device, like that's an open tine flash hider that's fairly efficient. That's a closed tine flash hider that's fairly efficient. These are not super short barrels. The biggest time I've run into it, I'd say, like 15 years ago, 12 years ago, shooting 10.5-inch gun with a bird cage, standard A2, would cause night vision to gate down significantly. So auto gating is a thing where the night vision has too much light coming in or excessive light coming in, and it'll dim down to protect itself and the user. So it's not like unmitigated light intensification going through the tube. And that amount of light would basically, it was almost like it turned the tube off for a split second. It would gate down to the point that it was almost unusable. Swap it out for an open time flash hider, and it fixed the issue. It would still dim just a little bit, but it's tolerable. So real efficient muzzle devices, much better. Some of that is setting your gun up. Some of that is picking ammo. And then some of it is just like it's the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
I feel
Jim,
like
you have that one AR set up with a flash enhancer.
I undid that.
Oh, you don't have the you
Control-
don't have the enhancer on anymore?
Control Z. I took that off.
I was like, is that an AR or a flamethrower?
But if you're shooting with nods, Mark, nods and suppressors.
Yep.
They go hand in hand.
This is true.
Like hunting and camo. I mean, it just get one of them bad boys. And
Yeah.
you'll be just
You're
fine.
right.
Even if it's just like a shorty can. Now, that being said, do your research, because we had a student come through, and I don't remember what the can was, but that thing put out a lot of fire.
Shocking.
I'm not sure what was the cause of it, but it put out a ton of fire. Fairly consistently. Like some cans, you'll shoot a little bit, and then you'll get like one, kind of fiery round out of 10 or 15. That one was like consistently spitting out a bunch of fire.
Weird.
And then you wonder, was that an ammo thing? Was that a can thing? I don't know. I really don't.
But suppressors are a great complement to night vision.
Okay, excellent. So you're going to have to get a suppressor too. Check. Okay. And you've touched on this, but just like, care and like it's like light exposure as it relates to care. Like obviously these are very expensive. So like what are things that you're doing that?
Yeah, so you'll notice like this unit and this unit, the PVS-31 and the DTMVS have daytime or completely occluding caps over them, so that like the DTMVS has caps with little holes in it so that a little bit of light can come through. If you were to turn it on, you would still have a viewable image of the world around you, but it would be protecting the device from excessive ambient light. My 14 doesn't have it on there. It also doesn't have a battery in it. So you want to use daytime caps whenever possible. When it's bright out, you want to protect them from bright light sources, particularly lasers, really bright lights. Now,
and is that only when it's on or even when it's off?
So I would say even when it's off, unless the battery is out. And even then, I just find that it's like good practice to keep them covered up. So like normally I would not have my night vision kicked up like this, pointing at the sky or at the ceiling. This has caps on it, so I'm fine with that. I just don't like them to be looking at bright light sources persistently, particularly in a fixed manner. So like it's one thing to have night vision on your head and you're walking around and they're just intermittent, a little bit of light over you. It's another thing to like set your helmet down or set the device down and it's staring at a fixed image that is a lot of light. It'll burn that image into the tube. The other side of that is like the brighter the light, the shorter the amount of time that it should sit on your device. So you don't want to shine a laser into, that's a very concentrated bright light. You don't want to shine a laser into a night vision device for really any more time than absolutely necessary for whatever the context you're, if you're doing like force on force or something like that. If it's something like headlights, like, okay, I maybe just don't want to stare at those headlights for like, even if you just kind of like if on a sunny day where the sun's low on the horizon, if you put your hand up between you and the light source and you can kind of minimize how much kind of the edge of that light coming, like that is enough to to protect. It'll also improve your view because your device is going to adjust to that brightest light source. But the biggest thing is just like think time of that light being exposed to the device to where it can burn in. But generally speaking, like I'll turn my night vision on with the lights on in a room. I don't care because I'm not like holding it on a bright light source, right?
Okay.
So keep it moving, that sort of thing. Walking into a lit room from a dark area, not going to hurt it. Looking at a moving vehicle, not going to hurt it. Like staring at a vehicle's headlights through night vision, on a long enough time period, it might burn an image in.
Okay.
There is a cure to that, the black box treatment. So take your device, put a fresh battery in it, turn it on, stick it in a box that's light proof, and then like stick it in a dark closet and let it just sit there and run, and it'll help kind of heal the tube a little bit. Some of that image will decrease.
Yeah,
another oddity of
things.
So it's electrified, but there's basically no photons coming in, and it'll help to clean off the image.
They are partly alive, Mark.
They are.
They are an organism.
They have personalities.
You mentioned the zone 2. Like, are you just dividing
Think of like the center of the viewable image, and then a donut around that, and then a donut around that. And so, like, if you were to envision, like, what's the most important part of the image? Probably the center, right? And then it's outside of that's a little less important, and then the outer, like, rim, of the image is the least important. So, like, if I have a big old blim in the center, kind of a big deal.
That's a zone 1 blim.
That's a zone 1 blim. If I have a similar sized blim on the edge, is it that big of a deal? I mean, it's not ideal, but do I care as much? Like, I definitely don't care as much as if it's dead center in the tube.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
cool. I wrote a bunch of stuff down, but you kind of hit on it as we talked through it. So I'm good.
I think there's more night vision talks to be had. We're at an hour 15. And,
what was the next thing? It was kind of a big one.
NODS adverse thermal, which does get into a lot. That's
a whole thing.
It is. And we like cliffhangers.
Yeah. So let us know if you want the whole thing.
We want to force people to have a reason. I'm sick of listening to these guys, but I guess I got to come back.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Mike, thank you. It is, these devices are, very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And then also, I guess we got the Alien podcast, too, that we can do on NODS as well.
Just wait till we get Joe Rogan.
Get Joe Rogan.
So, okay. I'll call, call him. I'll hit him up on the celly. Cool. Well, Mike, thanks again. Jim, thanks. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you have additional night vision NODS questions out there, let us know that as well. If you want to hear these other 4 podcasts that apparently we can do on night vision as well, let us know that.
Let me throw this plug out there. If night vision is something you want to just get hands-on experience with, you don't want to buy the stuff first. You just want to do it.
Oh.
And you know how to shoot an AR in the daytime. That's a good start. Sign up for a night vision class at Vortex Edge. I know 2023 doesn't have anything up just yet. We're working on adding some stuff to the 2023 calendar, so keep an eye on the Vortex Edge part of our website, just vortexedge.com. And when you see the night vision class pop up, you can take it. It's 2 days. Mike leads it with our other instructors. You get to shoot. You don't have to switch your sleep schedule and, work in the middle of the night. We just do it on the indoor range. We turn off all the lights. It's awesome. Middle of the day. And we will supply you, if you don't have it, with the dual tube NODS, a helmet, a sweet mount that flips up, and a laser to stick on your rifle that you bring. You bring the rifle and the ammo. We'll supply all that stuff, and then you get to use it and learn how to use it for 2 days and make some really educated buying decisions then if you decide to do it. Or, hell, if you're just an enthusiast and that's all you want to do, that's great too. But you can make some more educated buying decisions, I think, after doing the class. It's really cool.
Or, if you really just want to use some of this stuff but don't have the $40K to drop afterwards, then you still get to use it. If you have $40K
to drop on NODS, get quad NODS.
Get Panos.
Get the, anyway.
And apparently you guys can help them out with that decision as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, that's that. I'm done.
Okay.
That's my sale.
Good. No, perfect. I'm glad you mentioned that, Jim.
We go for the long play here. We lull them into a conversation for an hour and 18 minutes and then sell them.
They're so tired, they just like,
they'll buy it. They'll do anything.
Add to cart.
Fine.
Just quit talking. I'll take the course.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Catch you on the next one. Bye.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation Podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.